NAMA and the banking crisis with Mr. Mathews. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Mathews back again. And I wish to advise everyone that we will receive short opening remarks from Mr. Mathews, which then will be followed by a question and answer session. I'm requesting that all mobile phones will be switched off. And I want to draw everyone's attention to the fact that members of the committee have absolute privilege, but this same privilege does not apply to witnesses appearing before the committee. The committee cannot guarantee any level of privilege to witnesses before it. Further, under the salient rulings of the chair, members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official by name in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. So, Mr. Mathews, I'd like if you would continue with your observations, and then we will go into a question and answer session.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning to all the members of the committee. And I'm delighted and thank you for the opportunity. It's the third attempt actually to get to present the central core cogent ideas about NAM and the banking crisis. I have circulated to the members of the committee prior to the 5th of May, when the first presentation took place, 4 pages of core proposals of dealing with the banking crisis. In a nutshell, we've gone down the wrong road and we can come back onto the right road. The right road is the one that will recapitalise the 3 viable banks, Bank of Ireland, AIB and EBS. They're bruised and battered, they're undercapitalised and they're badly directed and managed. But they can be reconstituted and rebuilt. The 2 other banks, Nationwide and Anglo-Irish Bank, are beyond repair. They should be closed. The question is, to recapitalise the 3 viable banks, what roughly are the minimum figures involved? The answer is 17.5 billion. That's 17,500 million euro. And I'm not going to go into the detailed portfolio constitution of those figures, but it can be shown on an overview basis by experts with experience in this, that AIB needs 10 billion, Bank of Ireland 6.5 billion and EBS 1 billion. You can ask me questions later, but they're the figures. The question arises, how can you provide that amount of capital? And the answer is the state can do the majority of it, and the bondholders in those 3 institutions can provide the balance. We now switch over to Anglo-Irish Bank and Irish Nationwide, which were appallingly run from a banking point of view, where their assets are less than 50% recoverable. And again, it can be shown by expert analysis and demonstration that the correct approach, and you've seen it on your single-page submissions that are presented to you, that Anglo should be closed immediately. It'll take 4 or 5 years to carry it out, but the decision should be made immediately, and that will save the taxpayers not less than 17 billion euro. You had your presentation on the 16th of June. Sorry, I'll take it chronologically. After Mr. Reckling and Mr. Watson produced their report on the banking crisis, they spoke to you here in committee, and they answered your questions. And it's interesting to note that in their report, early in the executive summary, they made a point which wasn't accurate, actually, where they say the Irish people had a love or a preponderance to invest in property assets, and that Ireland hadn't suffered ever a property bubble crisis. That was incorrect. We had in the 1980s. And I only know it too well, as do many of my colleagues, who had to carry out the loans recoveries, workouts, and realisations work. Anyway, they made their presentation, and after their presentation, I was disappointed when outside of the terms of reference of the report, they were asked how they saw the work post-guarantee that had been undertaken by the government, what progress, if any, had been made. And they said, sportingly really and generously, I suppose in a wider context, well, some good work seems to have been done and some progress seems to have been made. And that got magnified coverage in the media and gave a false impression that they were actually approving or endorsing the work of what had happened since the crisis day. And they weren't, because they hadn't, it wasn't within their brief to do that work or to make those comments. The next meeting was Professor Honohan's report, when he presented to you and here at committee, and he answered questions. And his conclusions are very succinctly put on the 2 pages. And most tellingly, as regards the guarantee, the blanket guarantee given, he said, even without any hindsight benefit, the scope and the style of that guarantee was inappropriate and should not have been brought about in the way that it was. And that's without, I repeat, without the benefit of hindsight. No, hindsight wasn't needed. And Merrill Lynch, as you know from the Public Accounts Committee, they presented a range of scenarios and alternatives and didn't actually proactively underwrite any recommendation, but rather said that there were more dangers in one rather than the other. But then it brings us back to, if Professor Honan, having done his excellent work, was able to conclude that the guarantee should not have been made in the way that it was, that's a very serious thing. So we've dealt with what can be done recapitalising the banks and should be done, and is within the scope of a successful task for the country. We know what should be done with Anglo-Irish Bank and Irish Nationwide. We are able to understand better how things happened the way they did and shouldn't have happened the way they did. And I refer to that guarantee. So then it begs the question, where we're at now is a very messy place, almost 2 years after that guarantee. And I know that the banks and NAMA have made no progress, actually, in resolving any of the bad loans. And again, I'd like to emphasise that many people don't understand the nature of what the problem was, the size of the problem, and the task ahead. The problem was that in 4 years, approximately, 200 billion of excess lending had occurred, and assets were created that will never be collected. That's the problem. And it's not a problem of looking at the liabilities and capital sides of the balance sheets individually of banks, but rather looking at the overall asset side. What is collectible? Like when a business buys in stock and they've bought it badly and they can't sell it. There's no point in trying to shift it into a warehouse, NAMA, and try and pretend that NAMA can deal with it any better than the originators of those purchases. Not so. Again, the rather unnecessary, it's silly, it's stupid, in fact, for the banks to be housing NAMA divisions and doing the actual work, the operational work. In fact, they're not doing it yet. It's all in a state of suspense and paralysis because of the lack of clarity of what should have been clearer and couldn't have been clearer of transfers and valuation transfers of these loans. The Americans got it right at the outset. They had a troubled asset relief program which got approval for 700 billion of state funds. And the main thrust of that originally, when it was mooted, was that there would be a toxic asset purchase program, a NAMA. And they looked into this rigorously and professionally. And within weeks, they saw it couldn't work. Such a project was not fit for purpose.